Somalia, officially the Federal Republic of Somalia and formerly known as the Somali Democratic Republic, is a country located in the Horn of Africa. Somalia was an important center for commerce with the rest of the ancient world, and according to most scholars, it is among the most probable locations of the fabled ancient land of Punt. During the Middle Ages, several powerful Somali empires dominated the regional trade, including the Ajuran Sultanate, the Adal Sultanate, the Warsang Ali Sultanate, the Sultanate of the Geledi, and the Majeerteen Sultanate. In the late 19th century, through a succession of treaties with these kingdoms, the British and Italians gained control of parts of the coast, and established British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland. In the interior, Muhammad Abdullah Hassan's Dervish state successfully repulsed the British Empire 4 times and forced it to retreat to the coastal region, but the Dervishes were finally defeated in 1920 by British air power. Italy acquired full control of the northeastern, central and southern parts of the territory after successfully waging a campaign of the sultanates against the ruling Majeerteen Sultanate and the Sultanate of Hobyo. This occupation lasted until 1941, when it was replaced by a British military administration. Northwestern Somalia would remain a protectorate, while northeastern, central and southern Somalia by agreement became a United Nations trusteeship on the 1st of April 1950, with a promise of independence after 10 years. On the 1st of July 1960, the two regions united as planned to form the independent Somali Republic under a civilian government. The Somali National Assembly, headed by Haji Bashir Ismail Yusuf, approved the act uniting the former Italian Somaliland with British Somaliland, establishing the Republic of Somalia. Prehistory. Somalia has been inhabited since at least the Paleolithic, when the Doin and Hargesan cultures flourished. The oldest evidence of burial customs in the Horn of Africa comes from cemeteries in Somalia dating back to the 4th millennium BC. The stone implements from the Jalelo site in the north were also characterized in 1909 as important artifacts demonstrating the archaeological universality during the Paleolithic between the East and the West. According to linguists, the first Afro-Asiatic-speaking populations arrived in the region during the ensuing Neolithic period from the families proposed Ahimat in the Nile Valley, or the Near East. Other scholars propose that the Afro-Asiatic family developed in situ in the Horn, with its speakers subsequently dispersing from there. The El Azguil complex on the outskirts of Hargeisa in northwestern Somalia dates back around 5,000 years, and has rock art depicting both wild animals and decorated cows. Other cave paintings are found in the northern Dumberland region, which feature one of the earliest known depictions of a hunter on horseback. The rock art is in the distinctive Ethiopian-Arabian style, dated to 1000 to 3000 BCE. Additionally, between the towns of Las Kori and El Ao in northern Somalia lies Karanagan, the site of numerous cave paintings of real and mythical animals. Each painting has an inscription below it which collectively have been estimated to be around 2,500 years old. Ancient land of Punt. Ancient pyramidical structures, mausoleums, ruined cities and stone walls found in Somalia are evidence of an old sophisticated civilization that once thrived in the Somali Peninsula. The findings of archaeological excavations and research in Somalia show that this civilization enjoyed a lucrative trading relationship with ancient Egypt and Mycenaean Greece since the 2nd millennium BCE. This supports the hypothesis of Somalia and all the adjacent Horn territories corresponding with the ancient land of Punt. The Puntites traded myrrh, spices, gold, ebony, short-horn cattle, ivory and frankincense with the ancient Egyptians, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Indians, Chinese and Romans through the commercial ports. An ancient Egyptian expedition sent to Punt by the 18th dynasty Queen Hatshepsut is recorded on the temple reliefs at Deir el-Bahari. During the reign of the Puntite king Parahu and Queen Ati. Ancient maritime history. Ancient Somalis domesticated the camel somewhere between the 3rd millennium and 2nd millennium BCE, from where it spread to ancient Egypt and North Africa. In the classical period, the Somali city-states of Mosilon, Opone, Malau, Sarapi and Mundus, Essina and Taba in Somalia developed a lucrative trade network connecting with merchants from Phoenicia, Ptolemaic Egypt, Greece, Parthian Persia, Sheba, Nabataria and the Roman Empire. They used the ancient Somali maritime vessel known as the Bedouin to transport their cargo. After the Roman conquest of the Nabatean Empire and the Roman naval presence at Aden to curb pillaging, Somali and Gulf Arab merchants by agreement barred Indian ships from trading in the free port cities of the Arabian Peninsula to protect the interests of Somali and Arab merchants in the extremely lucrative ancient Red Sea Mediterranean Sea commerce. However, Indian merchants continued to trade in the port cities of the Somali Peninsula, which was free from Roman interference. For centuries, the Indian merchants brought large quantities of cinnamon from Sri Lanka and Indonesia to Somalia and Arabia. This is said to have been the best-kept secret of the Somali and Gulf Arab merchants in the trade with the Roman and Greek world. The Romans and Greeks believed the source of cinnamon to have been the Somali Peninsula, but in reality, the highly valued product was brought to Somalia by way of Indian ships, through collusive agreement by Somali and Gulf Arab traders. Indian, Chinese cinnamon was also exported for far higher prices to North Africa, the Near East and Europe, which made the cinnamon trade a very profitable revenue generator, especially for the Somali merchants through whose hands large quantities were shipped across ancient sea and land routes. Medieval Islam was introduced to the northern Somali coast early on from the Arabian Peninsula, shortly after the Hijra. Zila's 2 Mihrab Masjid al-Qiblatain dates to the 7th century, and is the oldest mosque in the city. In the late 9th century, al-Yaqubi wrote that Muslims were living along the northern Somali seaboard. He also mentioned that the Adal kingdom had its capital in the city, suggesting that the Adal Sultanate with Zila as its headquarters dates back to at least the 9th or 10th century. According to I.M. Lewis, the polity was governed by local dynasties, who also ruled over the similarly established Sultanate of Mogadishu in the littoral Benadir region to the south. Adal's history from this founding period forth would be characterized by a succession of battles with neighboring Abyssinia. The Sultanate of Mogadishu's first dynasty was established by Sultan Fakhr ad-Din. This ruling house was succeeded by the Muzaffar dynasty, and the kingdom subsequently became closely linked with the powerful Somali Ajuran Sultanate. For many years, Mogadishu stood as the preeminent city in the Bilad al-Barbar, which was the medieval Arab term for the Somali coast. Following his visit to the city, the 12th century Syrian historian Yaqut al-Hamawi wrote that it was inhabited by Berbers, the ancestors of the modern Somalis. The Warsang Ali Sultanate was a kingdom centered in northeastern and in some parts of southeastern Somalia. It was one of the largest sultanates ever established in the territory and, at the height of its power, included the Sanag region and parts of the northeastern Bari region of the country, an area historically known as Markir of the Markir Coast. The Sultanate was founded in the late 13th century in northern Somalia by a group of Somalis from the Warsang Ali branch of the Darod clan, and was ruled by the descendants of the Ajuran. The Muslim and Christian communities of modern Somalia and Ethiopia enjoyed friendly relations for centuries. The conquest of Shoa ignited a rivalry for supremacy between the Christian Solomonids and the Muslim Ifatites, which resulted in several devastating wars and ultimately ended in a Solomonic victory over the Kingdom of Ifat. Parts of northwestern Somalia came under the rule of the Solomonids in medieval times, especially during the reign of Amdac. In 1403 or 1415, measures were taken against the Muslim Sultanate of Adal. The emperor eventually captured King Saad ad-Din II of the Warlashma dynasty in Zila and had him executed. The Warlashma Chronicle, however, records the date as 1415, which would make the Ethiopian victor Emperor Yeshak I. After the war, the reigning king had his minstrels compose a song praising his victory, which contains the first written record of the word Somali. Saad ad-Din I's family was subsequently given safe haven at the court of the king of Yemen, where his sons regrouped and planned the revenge on the Solomonids. The oldest son Sabi'ah ad-Din II built a new capital eastwards of Zila known as Dhaka and began referring to himself as the king of Adal. He continued the war against the Solomonic Empire. Despite his army's smaller size, he was able to defeat the Solomonids at the battles of Sarjan and Zedikar Amhara and consequently pillaged the surrounding areas. Many similar battles were fought between the Adalites and the Solomonids, with both sides achieving victory and suffering defeat, but ultimately, Sultan Sabi'ah ad-Din II successfully managed to drive the Solomonic army out of Adal territory. He died a natural death and was succeeded by his brother Mansur ad-Din, who invaded the capital and royal seat of the Solomonic Empire in Dro. Emperor Dawit II to Yedalia, where, according to al-Makrazi, Sultan Mansur destroyed a Solomonic army and killed the emperor. He then advanced to the mountains of Mocha, where he encountered a 30,000-strong Solomonic army. The Adalite soldiers surrounded their enemies and for 2 months besieged the trapped Solomonic soldiers until a truce was declared in Mansur's favor. Later on in the campaign, the Adalites were struck by a catastrophe when Sultan Mansur and his brother Muhammad were captured in battle by the Solomonids. Mansur was immediately succeeded by the youngest brother of the family, Jamal ad-Din II. Sultan Jamal reorganized the army into a formidable force and defeated the Solomonic armies at Baal, Yedaya and Jazia. Emperor Yeshak I responded by gathering a large army and invaded the cities of Yedaya and Jazia, but was repulsed by the soldiers of Jamal. Following this success, Jamal organized another successful attack against the Solomonic forces and inflicted heavy casualties in what was reportedly the largest Adalite army ever fielded. As a result, Yeshak was forced to withdraw towards the Blue Nile over the next 5 months, while Jamal ad-Din's forces pursued them and looted much gold on the way, although no engagement ensued. After returning home, Jamal sent his brother Ahmad with the Christian battle expert Harb Jaush to successfully attack the province of Dawara. Despite his losses, Emperor Yeshak was still able to continue field armies against Jamal. Sultan Jamal continued to advance further into the Abyssinian heartland. However, Jamal, on hearing of Yeshak's plan to send several large armies to attack 3 different areas of Adal, returned to Adal, where he fought the Solomonic forces at Harjay, and, according to al-Makrizi, this is where the Emperor Yeshak died in battle. The young Sultan Jamal ad-Din II, at the end of his reign, had outperformed his brothers and forefathers in the war arena and became the most successful ruler of Adal to date. Within a few years, however, Jamal was assassinated by either disloyal friends or cousins around 1432 or 1433, and was succeeded by his brother Badli ibn Sa'ad ad-Din. Sultan Badli continued the campaigns of his younger brother and began several successful expeditions against the Christian Empire. He recovered the kingdom of Bali and began preparations of a major Adalite offensive into the Ethiopian highlands. He successfully collected funding from surrounding Muslim kingdoms as far away as the kingdom of Mogadishu. However, these ambitious plans were thrown out the war chamber when King Badli died during the invasion of Dawara. He was succeeded by his son Muhammad ibn Badli, who sent envoys to the Sultan of Mamluk Egypt to gather support and arms in the continuing war against the Christian Empire. The Adalite ruler Muhammad and the Solomonic ruler Bahrain Amayum agreed to a truce, and both states in the following decades saw an unprecedented period of peace and stability. Early modern Sultan Muhammad was succeeded by his son Shams ad-Din, while Emperor Bahrain Amayum was succeeded by his son Eskandar. During this time period, warfare broke out again between the two states, and Emperor Eskandar invaded Dhaka, where he was stopped by a large Adalite army, which destroyed the Solomonic army to such an extent that no further expeditions were carried out for the remainder of Eskandar's reign. Adal, however, continued to raid the Christian Empire unabated under General Mafut, the leader of the Adalite war machine, who annually invaded the Christian territories. Eskandar was succeeded by Emperor Naod, who tried to defend the Christians from General Mafut, but he too was also killed in battle by the Adalite army in Ifat. At the turn of the 16th century, Adal regrouped and, around 1527, under the charismatic leadership of Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, invaded Abyssinia. Adalite armies, with Ottoman arms and support, marched into Ethiopia and caused considerable damage on the highland state. Many historic churches, manuscripts and settlements were looted and burned during the campaigns. Adal's use of firearms, still only rarely used in Ethiopia, allowed the conquest of well over half of Ethiopia, reaching as far north as Tigray. The complete conquest of Ethiopia was averted by the timely arrival of a Portuguese expedition led by Cristóvão da Gama, son of the famed navigator Vasco da Gama. The Portuguese had been in the area earlier, in the early 16th century, in search of the legendary priest King Presta John, and, although a diplomatic mission from Portugal, led by Rodrigo de Lima, had failed to improve relations between the countries, they responded to the Ethiopian pleas for help and sent a military expedition to the fellow Christians. A Portuguese fleet under the command of Estevão da Gama was sent from Portuguese India and arrived at Massawa in February 1541. Here, he received an ambassador from the emperor beseeching him to send help against the Muslims. In July, a force of 400 musketeers, under the command of Cristóvão da Gama, younger brother of Estevão, marched into the interior. Joined by Ethiopian troops, they were at first successful against the Muslims, but they were subsequently defeated at the Battle of Wofla, and their commander captured and executed. On the 21st of February 1543, however, a joint Portuguese-Ethiopian force defeated the Muslim army at the Battle of Waina Daga, in which Ahmed Guri was killed and the war won. Ahmed Guri's widow married his nephew Anwar ibn Mujahid in return for his promise to avenge Ahmed's death, who succeeded Ahmed Guri, and continued hostilities against his northern adversaries until he killed the Ethiopian emperor in his second invasion of Ethiopia. During the age of the Ajurans, the sultanates and republics of Merka, Mogadishu, Barawa, Hobyo and the respective ports flourished and had a lucrative foreign commerce with ships sailing to and coming from Arabia, India, Venetia, Persia, Egypt, Portugal and as far away as China. The Vasco da Gama, who passed by Mogadishu in the 15th century, noted that it was a large city with houses of 4 or 5 stories and big palaces in its center and many mosques with cylindrical minarets. In the 16th century, Duarte Barbosa noted that many ships from the kingdom of Kambar in India sailed to Mogadishu with cloths and spices, for which they in return received gold, wax and ivory. Barbosa also highlighted the abundance of meat, wheat, barley, horses, and fruit on the coastal markets, which generated enormous wealth for the merchants. Mogadishu, the center of a thriving weaving industry known as Tob Benadir, together with Merka and Barawa, also served as transit stops for Swahili merchants from Mombasa and Malindi and for the gold trade from Kilwa. Jewish merchants from the Hormuz brought their Indian textile and fruit to the Somali coast in exchange for grain and wood. Trading relations were established with Malacca in the 15th century, with cloth, ambergris and porcelain being the main commodities of the trade. Giraffes, zebras and incense were exported to the Ming dynasty of China, which established Somali merchants as leaders in the commerce between Asia and Africa. In the process, the Somali language influenced the Chinese language. Hindu merchants from Surat and Southeast African merchants from Pate, seeking to bypass both the Portuguese blockade and Omani meddling, used the Somali ports of Merka and Barawa to conduct the trade in safety and without interference. The 16th century Somali-Portuguese wars in East Africa meant that geopolitical tensions would remain high, and the increased contact between Somali sailors and Ottoman corsairs worried the Portuguese, who sent a punitive expedition against Mogadishu under João de Sepúlveda, which was unsuccessful. Ottoman-Somali cooperation against the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean reached a high point in the 1580s when Ajuran clans of the Somali coastal cities began to sympathize with the Arabs and Swahilis under Portuguese rule and sent an envoy to the Turkish corsair Mir Ali Bey for a joint expedition against the Portuguese. He agreed and was joined by Somali fleet, which began attacking Portuguese colonies in Southeast Africa. The Somali-Ottoman offensive managed to drive out the Portuguese from several important cities such as Pate, Mombasa and Kilwa. However, the Portuguese governor sent envoys to India requesting a large Portuguese fleet. This request was answered and it reversed the previous offensive of the Muslims into one of defense. The Portuguese armada managed to retake most of the lost cities and began punishing the leaders, but they refrained from attacking Mogadishu. In the early modern period, successor states of the Adal and Ajuran empires began to flourish in Somalia. These were the Warsang Ali Sultanate, the Bari dynasties and the Gabroon dynasty. They continued the tradition of castle building and seaborne trade established by previous Somali empires. 19th century, Sultan Yusuf Muhammad Ibrahim, the third Sultan of the House of Gabroon, started the golden age of the Gabroon dynasty. His army came out victorious during the Badhira Jihad, which restored stability in the region and revitalized the East African ivory trade. He also received presents and had cordial relations with the rulers of neighboring and distant kingdoms such as the Omani, Wituland and Yemeni sultans. Sultan Ibrahim's son Ahmed Yusuf succeeded him and was one of the most important figures in 19th century East Africa. receiving tribute from Omani governors and creating alliances with important Muslim families on the East African coast. In northern Somalia, the Ajuran dynasty conducted trade with Yemen and Persia and competed with the merchants of the Bahri dynasty. The Jerads and the Bahri sultans built impressive palaces, castles and fortresses and had close relations with many different empires in the Near East. In the late 19th century, after the Berlin Conference, European powers began the scramble for Africa, which inspired the dervish leader Muhammad Abdullah Hassan to rally support from across the Horn of Africa and begin one of the longest anti-colonial struggles on the continent. In several of his poems and speeches, Hassan insisted that the British have destroyed our religion and made our children the children and of the Christian Ethiopians in league with the British, were bent upon plundering the political and religious freedom of the Somali nation. He soon emerged as the champion of his country's political and religious freedom, defending it against all Christian invaders. Hassan issued a religious ordinance that any Somali national who did not accept the goal of unity of Somalia and would not fight under his leadership would be considered as kafir regal. He soon acquired weapons from the Ottoman Empire, Sudan, and other sympathetic Muslim countries, and appointed ministers and advisors to administer different areas or sectors of Somalia. In addition, Hassan gave a clarion call for Somali unity and independence, in the process organizing his follower warriors. His dervish movement had an essentially military character, and the dervish state was fashioned on the model of a Salaya brotherhood. It was characterized by rigid hierarchy and centralization. Hassan threatened to drive the Christians into the sea. He committed the first attack by launching his first major military offensive with his 1,500 dervish equipped with 20 modern rifles on the British soldiers stationed in the region. He repulsed the British in 4 expeditions and had favorable diplomatic relations with the Central Powers of the Ottoman and German empires.